BionicDance is filmed in front of a live studio audience.
All right, what's up all my YouTubers? Chris Cornelius Jones coming to you again today. And I just have a very short one. Yes, we are continuing with our conversations with the atheist today.
He says continuing, but I've never heard of him. That's okay. This video is enough for a response all on its own. But first, dude, vertical video? That's a paddlin'. Let's do this. Greetings, fellow space travelers. BionicDance here. First things first. This guy rambles like you wouldn't believe and repeats the heck out of himself. As usual, there will be a link in the description to the original video if you're feeling masochistic. But fair warning, I will be cutting out a lot of it. Now, he's going to, eventually, ask us a few questions. I will deign to answer these, but probably not in the way he'd like.
And for this video, we are going to assume that God does not exist.
I can do that.
With that assumption, I have a very important question for you. Okay? If God does not exist, will you please answer from your worldview this question? Here it is. One thing that we cannot deny is that humans, we all die. Okay?
Speak for yourself. I haven't died yet. And to quote Dave Lister, I'm going out like I came in, screaming and kicking. I'm going to live forever or die trying.
As far as I understand in the atheist worldview, when you die, that's it. Because we don't have a soul in the atheist worldview. So when you die, that means we cease to exist forever. Okay? Now here's the question.
I thought he said, here's the question, like a minute ago. This is what I mean when I say that he rambles.
What that means is we all share the same fate. The question is, how is it fair? Explain to me, how is it just? How is it right that I or you who, let's say people in general, let's just say people in general, who are law-abiding citizens, people who live their life to try to help others, people who do good things, how is it fair that they share the same fate with Hitler?
There are a few problems with this question. Number one, the implicit assumption that we are somehow owed justice, that fairness is something we can take for granted. Number two, that everybody will agree on what is and is not just or unjust. Number three, that because of number two, we don't have to take a hand in creating and enforcing justice. But the fact is that in answering a question like this, all of the above must be discarded. From my perspective, it's not fair. And that's just tough noogies. Oh well. Plus, I'll bet you there are some holdout Nazis out there who consider what happened to Hitler in the Third Reich unjust. And it's only our opinion, however strong, that they're full of shit. That's life. You're not owed anything by the universe. And we're all just playing one big game of improv with only the rules we make for ourselves.
You mean to tell me that it doesn't really matter in the end how good you lived, whether you served others, or whether you lived a despicable, treacherous life by hurting others?
I am, in fact, telling you that, yes. Assuming we're talking about what happens after death. We have a justice system to make sure that what life we have is disrupted by assholes as little as possible. What I'm not saying is that it doesn't suck. I don't like it any more than he does, but the implicit assumption seems to be that because it sucks, there must be something else instead. I mean, he is a god-botherer after all. Does anybody think that if we read between the lines, we won't find the notion that because it stinks, it must not be so?
Now, remember here, I am asking a question from an atheistic point of view, from a person who is conceding for a moment. Let's assume God does not exist. In this worldview, how is that fair?
Nobody's saying that is fair. Let me ask you, what makes you think we're going to get fair treatment? And let me ask this. I'm assuming he's Christian based on his other videos. That God pulls stunts that we'd never put up with from another human, like global genocide. Is that really the entity we're supposed to trust with fairness and justice?
Now, with that said, that leads me to the next question.
It takes him most of a minute to actually ask the question, so we're going to do a little bit of pruning here.
We only live for 60 to 70 years, so we're just a fingernail and on a timeline spectrum of, all these years. Why does anything matter if that's the case?
The implicit assumption here is that there is a grand scheme, that there is some ultimate goal, a prize to collect when we cross the finish line, and maybe it'd be nice if such a thing existed. There are two things, however. One, I've never heard a grand scheme in religion either. It's always just going to heaven and worshiping forever. Not a goal I'd particularly want to strive for. Two, the assumption seems to be that any scheme must be a grand scheme, that we cannot work toward and appreciate something minor, even temporary, while we're alive, because none of that is worth anything. And yet, the very idea of value is relative. One person's awesome is another person's so what, or that stinks. If I strive toward making life awesome, that's enough for me. It seems it's not enough for theists, and I find that kind of sad, honestly. Tragic. I find your lives the ones I wouldn't want to live if the only thing that matters is some big, huge, reality-shaking goal.
How do you find meaning and purpose in this life?
Like this. See? I'm doing it right now. You may have noticed that I love animation. I have a few projects on the spike, and doing those fills my life with purpose and joy and fun, and occasional frustration, but I learn and overcome it. I'd love to work in Hollywood movies someday, too. I already have an IMDb page for some of the work I've done in video games and indie flicks. That fills my life with meaning and purpose. Sure, I may never leave a permanent mark on this world, though I did invent a word that seems to be gaining traction. If I ever see apistivist in the dictionary, I'll know I've had an effect on the larger world. But in my time here, I've had goals. I've realized some of them, working toward others, and I really don't need anything else. And I wish you didn't either. I think your life would be better for it. Probably just as much as you think mine would be better with a larger purpose.
Why not just live it up, do, whatever I can to fulfill my lustly pleasures, regardless of who I hurt, regardless of who I run over?
I was thinking that sounded good, right up until the regardless of who I hurt part. I don't exist alone. If I can hurt people, they can hurt me, and we're both making each other's lives worse. We're both making our limited time less full of fun and lust and games. So we have that golden rule, that unspoken agreement to not be jerks in order that we might maximize happiness. And we have a justice system to enforce it just in case. If you need some sort of ultimate justice or comeuppance after death in order to behave, that makes you rather scary and dangerous, far more than most atheists I've ever known.
Because in the end, it doesn't matter. I don't get anything for trying to be good. And there's no punishment if I was bad.
The critical part, the real crux of this argument, is the phrase, in the end. How about right now? Does right now not matter at all? Will you never reap rewards or suffer punishment for what you do in life? Oh sure, you might get away with something or have a good deed go unrecognized. I think we've all been there. But do you really think that, without God, everything in this life goes unrewarded or unpunished? Do the results of our actions we experience now not matter at all?
You're gonna die and then you cease to exist. Why? If that's the case, how do you find hope? I'm sorry, that is a miserable reality to me.
Hey, I'm not going to say that the prospect of ending doesn't twinge me a little, and I'm definitely grumpy about the fact that I'll probably never experience interstellar travel, but I've learned to live with it. If you did discover that there is no God, would you really spend all of your time being unhappy, brooding over your eventual end? Really? Somehow, I doubt it.
You may say, well, it is what it is. You see, the hope I have in Christ, in the gospel, is not because I just really want it to be true, to escape this dreadful thing called death. That's not why I believe. I believe because it is true. Okay?
Well, that's a whole other can of worms. You're gonna have to prove that, buddy.
But that aside, because again, in this video, we are assuming that it's not true. We're assuming that God does not exist. Can you answer that question? I really want to know from your view in the comments, how do you find hope and purpose in life when we all just die and cease to exist?
Well, that's just it, isn't it? I need to find hope and purpose in life. If this is all I've got, better make the best of it. That's why I look at people who've dedicated their life to a religion, taking vows of chastity, only wearing certain clothes, never eating certain foods, avoiding certain kinds of entertainment, or whatever, in worship of a god they don't even know exists, quite possibly wasting the only life they get on something entirely fruitless. I find myself asking why. Seriously, look at it from my perspective.
So those are the two questions.
And I'm spent. Until next time, fellow space travelers, this is BionicDance saying don't run on automatic. Instead, please think. Dewey, what the hell are you doing? Get out of the way!
Sandra, this isn't right. There has to be a better way to make money than taking these assassination contracts.
Like what? What do you have in mind?
Well, have you ever considered Patreon?
Patreon? Where people donate money for those videos I'm in? Do you really think that'll pay the bills, Dewey?
Well, if people want to prevent a few international incidents, I'm sure they'll be willing to contribute. After all, what's $1 or $2 per video to forestall the occasional war, right?
Well, I suppose I could give it a try. You'd better be right about this.
Come on, Sandra, let's go home. Sandra!
What? He was right there. I'll start that Patreon thing tomorrow. Promise. Reading videos has been found to cause fresher breath, enhanced metabolism, and greater sexual magnetism.